Good day, Dragon Slayers. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Tom Vitker, and my partner, Michael Dallin, my cousin. We're both Motown boys, growing up a bit. Uh, Michael is the author of The Rainbow Covenant, which you can see proudly displayed on his shelf behind him. I'm author of a book on self transformation called Dragon Slaying under my name on Amazon, should you care to purchase it. Uh, I wanted to alert our viewers and listeners that Michael and I were discussing kind of a new project of how to get us recentered as a culture and spiritually. Michael is my resident expert in all things Jewish and holy, uh, and I guess I would be an expert in how to skirt the boundaries and still sustain God's blessings, we hope. Okay. Uh, but I wanted to talk about something quite serious. America is undergoing a rather dramatic transformation, certainly over the past century, if not half century. Uh, we are losing religious affiliations, both in Christianity and other faiths, although Judaism has seen a relatively recent blip. Uh, Increasingly, our values are becoming more secularized. We've also begun to lose the anchors of what I would describe the organizing myth that secured our country for many years. Uh, and I think the foundation of the dissolution was the awareness that America's past certainly has included some evil, but in addition, it had a foundation that was really quite elegant and likely most of any major constitutional government most closely anchored to Old Testament values. As a consequence of the drift away from religion and a drift away from our organizing myth, we've seen an abundance of evidences of social dislocation. So are we confronting a time of despair? Now, Michael, as a biblical historian, I'd like to ask you, have we been there before?
We've never been in modernity before. We've never had this power over the environment that we've got. I don't think we've been anywhere near anything like this where we're at. Let me put in that crime rates are down in America. They're way down. Crime rates are more like what they were in after World War II and in the 50s. People don't lock their doors much anymore. Um, I mean, you do have disintegration in our different populations. I mean, fewer and fewer families. Um,
Some,
we
some,
have there are a lot of fatherless children, um, and I mean, we're living in a time where there's a question of what is the point of being a male. Margaret Mead, my quote, and a very wise person. She learned from what was his name?
Franz Boas.
Franz Boas, this Heidelberg scarred Jew in Heidelberg, who came to Columbia, who suffered terrible anti-Semitism and had to keep fighting duels against Jew haters at Heidelberg. So his face was just a mass of Heidelberg sword scars, So he was quite a frightening looking guy. But her her comment, the hardest thing for every human society is to find a role for the males. And what is the role for the males? And um, Torah actually provides a role for the males as the Torah scholars of the society, of the people who most actively interact with the King of the universe, despite they pray. Men are commanded to um, engage in organized worship, while women are not. We have the idea that women are higher or closer to God's ideal of satisfaction without praying, without all that fuss. Women don't need to wear a yarmulke, for instance. Uh, they don't need to be reminded that there is a God above, particularly, while men, egocentric creatures that we are, do. But how do
Could,
you
could, it,
find a
could, it,
role for?
could, it, could it be that in ancient days the 11th commandment was don't mess my hair?
No. Uh, I I think a lot of what we're dealing with is an inevitable, ineluctable consequence of modernization, of greater human power over the natural world, uh, the
How are we doing
ability to
that now?
draw. Well, I don't know. I mean, I've got a used Cadillac that is a really powerful car, and our roads are really pretty good. We complain about them all the time, and I can drive really fast, and I really enjoy it. I
Okay.
get a vestibular workout every time I go to the store. Some of it involves driving at 60 miles an hour, around the block. Um, that's pretty cool.
Some of
You
us
know,
get
I
vestibular workouts every time we stand up.
Well, that's another level of vestibular workout. Uh, but I I think that the Hebrew Revolution, as I call it, I keep going on about uh, what happened with Abraham breaking away from the nasty, the stagnant, awful, oppressive systems and mental crippling ideas of the past, and then Sinai and Moses, and breaking away from the foul idolatry and the horrible stagnancy of previous systems, has resulted in a permanent revolution, with the Jewish people being the avatars and the catalysts of a whole new way of, of living, as a tribe or a nation of mankind, who are exist to lift mankind by its bootstraps and raise us up, and make us more human, civilize us. So I think the project is working. I mean, it's amazing to me how that I was just going. I was waiting for to do this show, and I was looking at the New York Times obits, and and they have a couple of people here, and you never know except by doing some research that either one of these guys, one is a mime, a scholar and teacher of mime in San Francisco, whose mother's maiden name was Gerst, which is a very common Jewish name. Unless you knew that, you'd never know. This other fellow, David Hirsch, he turned the Sonoma coast of California into a great wine area. You still have this weird phenomenon of these odd members of the tribe of Israel, who aren't even identified as members of the tribe of Israel. Often they're atheists, who are proceeding to remake the world around them in unprecedented ways. I was talking to an atheist friend about Rod Serling, the creator of the Twilight Zone. And Rod Serling was an atheist. He was bar mitzvahed, but he had after the war, and he was badly injured. He had horrible, violent combat experiences, and he came back, and he believed in peace, and he believed in the moral values of Judaism were things that he really deeply cared about. He ate pork. He ignored Shabbos, the Sabbath, but and I think he probably thought of Judaism as a quaint folk religion. But they came out of this movement and were avatars or principal agents of this wonderful revolutionary movement, and it reshaped the human race, and along with the Torah had a great deal to do with the attitudes of the English inventors who mostly produced the industrial age. They believed in the Torah's proposition that man should dominate the world, that we should be God's agents on earth, unlike the animals. We're not just another creature like the certain Eastern or primitive religions teach, that man is an exceptional being, which we are. I think the Hebrew Revolution is working out. Every generation, it's a perils of Pauline kind of game to see whether or not we're going to sink. I have the sense that sometimes we have to have a divine intervention to keep us going. I remember after the early nuclear age, they were asking all of these scientists and generals, how is it that we've never had a nuclear accident, a substantial nuclear accident, but something going wrong with one of the atomic bombs or the hydrogen bombs, which, by the way, would have been inconceivable without the contributions of Jewish scientists like Oppenheimer and Teller, and Einstein, and they
pause for a moment, Michael, because I'd like to ask you a biblical question.
But the thing is, what they said was they thought there must have been divine intervention to keep us from blowing ourselves to hell. Yes, I'm ready for your question.
Okay, just getting back to some stats. Indeed, you are correct. The crime rates have fallen since 1990. However, there are other indices of social dislocation that have climbed.
Or decadence, degeneration, no question.
And, you pointed out that I believe most children now are born to unmarried mothers, or it's pretty much 50-50. And
in America, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And that leaves a legacy that we don't even know about yet. But also there are people that subjectively feel more lost without anchors.
Enemy.
Yeah, enemy. But the biblical question I want to ask you is, as I look at it and look around us, our beautiful earth, we both live in relatively green settings. For the most part, we have access to clean water and clean air. But if we follow the Eden metaphor, I would say that God has entrusted us with the responsibility of caring for this legacy. And it's reaffirmed in the saga of Noah. So it sounds like we need to be vigilant about that, about taking care of this earth, of taking care of each other. How are we doing at that?
Well, we could do better. We could be doing a lot better, Tommy.
We're of one mind.
We have one mind on this. Well, we're dealing with an interesting set of ideas that counter the Jewish tradition, and that would be Christianity, for instance. And I know you don't want to make Christians mad at us, but I keep running into Christians
Not only
who
do I
really,
not only do I not want to make Christians mad at us, I don't want to make Jesus mad at me.
well, I wouldn't worry about him too much. Um, just just another failed Jewish teacher, you know.
I
Uh,
would say that were it not for the political differences, Jewish would Jesus would have made one compelling prophet. But that's my own perspective.
well, a prophet has to have special insight. He might have been a very, I could see him as a good third grade Hebrew school teacher. You know, I mean, very compelling, very loving, no doubt. But I'm no Jeebus expert.
Okay.
Um, but um, you know, I was going on to you before about the report of the Club of Rome that came out
Go
when
ahead,
I was in
please.
when I was in college,
I was
and
there.
and they used computers, magical computers, then to extrapolate where we were going, and they made all these different predictions, and this would be 1970, I think, and it really moved me. I remember I got an A in an honors class, and it was in the geology department at my school, um, for the work on, you know, the work of the Club of Rome. And they made all these predictions, and we were going to run out of this. We're going to run out of copper. We were going to run out of other essential minerals they were talking about, um, and and then they threw in variables. Well, what if we had free energy? You know, what if we came up with something like fusion power, um, or magical solar power, and how would we do then? And they put all this together, and you know, and what they got was, as the human load on the planet increased with increasing population, increasing technological expertise, um, we were going to have exponential, that is to say, well, exponential growth rates, not mere multiplication, but growth rates of a factor of 10 repeatedly and over and over again. And we were going to have, you know, just enormous consequences with um, um, scarcity of resources and increasing poisons. That we would be, if we did have um, uh, enough, sufficient, or an excess of energy, what would we do with it? And the computer programs all pointed to the same things, that we would pollute the planet excessively, and we would end up with kind of a, if you remember the dystopian movie Soylent Green, um,
Yes.
and you know, a very hot world, an overcrowded world, world where food was scarce and people were enslaved. We'd have a reversion to horrible, instead of freedom, increasing freedom, we would have human slavery, and people would end up cannibalizing each other. uh, Soylent Green, the big line uh, at the end of Charlton Heston, Soylent Green is people. You know, we're eating. You know, it's a new food product produced by the mega corporation. Um,
Let me bring this home because uh, I was in Niger in the years between 1966 and 1968, and I saw this firsthand because I was aware, as well as many of us who were concerned about this, that the desert was growing,
yeah.
and with its growth, the capacity to feed people decreased. And I can recall my last several months in country, I did a presentation to the president and the Department of Health about the importance of containing the birth rates. And they thanked me for my presentation, and they appreciated what I was offering them. but they didn't have the political mettle to launch such a program because they believed that Islamic men looked upon fertility as an evidence of their own virility and could not contain it. Well, as a consequence, about a year and a half after I left, there was a horrible famine and there was a revolution. And the government that I had presented this to had been all overthrown because of the horrible conditions in the country, who have subsequently been taken over by Al Qaeda. So, this has very real consequences. We don't take care of people, we don't take care of our resources. We have social alienation, we have the potential of revolution, which is not always for the best.
Well, we have what I would call I know it sounds very quaint and old-fashioned to talk about idolatry, but you could say that they're Hebrew, they're counter-revolutionary movements, counter-revolutionary to the liberating Hebrew um, movement of Torah that makes men free. You have these idolatrous movements that are have people enthralled to false gods and false ideals, false Elohim, you would say, false high ones. Um, I run into Christians all the time who are convinced that it doesn't really matter what we do to this planet. We can use it like a pair of old shoes, and when we're done with it, when we've outgrown the shoes, we can just kick them off, and we're all going to be zapped up in a rapture, which is actually a new Christian doctrine. It's only a couple of 100 years old, if that. Um, and this planet doesn't matter. Islam has the same idea that that the planet Earth doesn't really matter much. Everything depends on Allah, the King of the universe, who is he's a very different character than the God of Israel, though the Muslims keep saying he's the same God. Different personality entirely. But they feel too that the world will all end, it will all go to hell, the sinners will be punished, and the life of man will take place in a spiritual sphere separate from this material sphere that we call Earth. And these are idolatrous conceptions, and they're screwing us up, And instead of believing that this Earth is all we have, which is the Hebrew teaching, and that it's our obligation to be good stewards of this earth, you have these idolatrous notions, and they are screwing up the planet. I was impressed. Not long ago, I was flying over the Middle East. I was going from the horrible desert, the disaster that is Egypt, to Jordan, and then from Jordan to India, and you fly over the Arabian Peninsula, and this is an area that Roman paganism has raped with their horrible idolatries, their false gods. They needed to get animals for their circuses. They needed beautiful wild animals, the elephants, the wolves, the bears, the lions and tigers, the gorillas, all the apex predators, and for their games where they I would like to say they butchered them, but they didn't butcher them. They tortured them. They had them in games, and they used them to make to make a Roman holiday. To 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 they fought in arenas, and they needed these animals for they gave them these horrible, violent, cruel deaths, and they vacuumed up the wild animals, the apex predators of Eurasia for like 400 or 500 years. Every week every Roman town of any size had to have its games. Finally, they ran out of animals and they just had people fighting each other, in horrible, cruel, awful ways. But they took away all they screwed up the ecology of these vast lands. But but we also have good examples. We know that we can make the world better. And Israel is a good example of that. I think the only country in the world that plants more trees than it harvests or loses. I remember somebody was looking at next to Niger. There's Upper Volta, a North African Sahel, semi of a desert country in the Sahara, and they're looking at it, and there's this big stretch of verdancy of grain, and they asked, well, what the hell is that? What's going on there? And it turned out it belonged to uh, these French farmers, and they had defended this land. They kept the nomads, the goats, and the wanderers from taking the wood, from despoiling it, from camping out, from devouring the grass, and over generations, and they kept it alive, and they had forests, and we hear, well, the climate is changing, you can't do anything about it, but despite these world trends, these people had managed to increase the forest canopy of their holdings and make it decent. So they were good stewards of their pocket of land.
Uh, by the way, those of you who are looking for Upper Volta on the map right now, it's been named Burkina Faso, which
I'm an old school guy. Sorry.
but you'll love this because there was so much turnover there because of political corruption. Burkina Faso in the indigenous dialects means the land of incorruptible people.
If only. Well, I told you, before I got into religion, I really believed in development economics, and I think both of us are pulled towards development economics. We care about developing human potential
Okay,
and saving.
time out. I
Okay.
want to give you one little trivia point about that. So while I'm overseas, there's a very active USAID project, and they did some wonderful work there. We were responsible for vaccinating virtually the entire population against smallpox and measles, among other things. But one of the things that we failed to consider is we had a USAID funded road project where we built these roads and bridges. But as a consequence of that, they built a bridge across the main water artery in Niger, which was the Niger River. And as a consequence of building that bridge, all those folks in their pirogues who were coming down the river with food would have to get out in portage around this bridge.
Oops. Well, they meant well.
Right.
Well, I remember coming out of. I'd been in the third world, and I was all hot for development economics. And I went to the University of Michigan. You know something about that,
Right.
and they had all these mostly Jewish economists running the Center for Research on Economic Development. And I told you this. They had adopted Ivory Coast as
Cote
their
d'Ivoire. Right.
as their baby, and
Do you know
they were
the
sent.
do you know the significance of Cote d'Ivoire?
They thought ivory came
Well, no. More
from there.
importantly, of all of the coastal, I would say, Northwest African countries, it's by far the most beautiful.
Well,
In fact, Abidjan was a
the
beautiful,
Paris.
yeah,
right.
French city that uh, was kind of a destination for me.
Indeed,
Yeah,
yeah, it was a hell of a place. So these guys set out to develop it, and they wondered what can these lazy, illiterate farmers, subsistence farmers, do to make some money in the world. So they decided they think tanked it, and they gave them. I know they can grow any idiot can grow a cocoa tree. So they had them growing cocoa. They were producing cocoa for the world's chocolate market, and indeed, and they got roads for them, and they developed wharves. They developed a system where they could export their cocoa, and it really looked good, and they really were beginning to make big money, international money, and all these gentle economists who would have been, I was saying, shouldn't you teach them some kind of values beyond the values of the subsistent farmers, these superstitious farmers who they used to use masks to cow their workers. While they weren't there, they would have these horrifying masks. I've collected a couple, that were invoking the spirits of the ancestors to scare the hell out of these living beings. So they, oh, God forbid that we should impose our values, our Jewish values, middle class Jewish values, America. Oh no, so these lovely people down there decided, well, we're really making money, a lot of money, but it really galls me to have to pay these workers of ours with my hard-earned cash. What if we just enslave them? What if we just get children and make them work for us for nothing? We'll still feed them, we'll give them rags to wear, but they'll work for us, and we'll save a lot of money, and we'll get richer. So, which they proceeded to do. So, what happened to
Abidjan, Abidjan,
Abidjan,
yeah,
the capital? So you had this ridiculous, the president rather, decided, well, this is all well and good, but look at all this money that's pouring in here. The taxes are great. I think that we could really improve on things by taking my home village, 60 miles inland, and turning that into the new capital. And he set out to build a replica of St. Paul's um, um, Basilica in the middle of the bush. And they couldn't get the blessing from Pope John Paul until they also committed to building a hospital. So they built this palace using Italian marble that they floated down all the way to Africa and brought inland. Um, and they put up a cornerstone of the new hospital, which was enough to get John Paul to come and kiss the ground and bless the new endeavor. They never did finish the hospital, but they built the palace with all this Italian marble, a palace and the new cathedral, twice the size of St. Paul's in Rome, with better marble. And believe it or not, with all this enslaving of human beings and building this ridiculous capital 60 miles into the bush away from the beautiful town where everybody wanted to live, they also had a revolution, and which was famous for the child soldiers who were what propelled the violence was chocolate. It was like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. They were floating in chocolate money, and they bought all these modern weapons of violence, and they had all these child soldiers working for them, whom they kept high. They gave them different drugs to keep them going, and they were famous for chopping off the hands of their enemies. It was brutal. It was awful. And now I see that the chocolate crop is failing because they failed to plant a new generation of cocoa trees. So
So,
so
as a as
culture is everything.
as a biblical scholar, what lessons can you draw from this? I mean,
People are really perverse. Well, people without it's like uh, people without the law. They will do awful things. People unrestrained by fear of God, unrestrained by knowledge of God. Uh, People with uh, pagan impulses who have the idea that this planet is a disposable place rather than you know something to be protected as the equivalent of a Muslim waqf or holy trust that that we dominate because God has made us his stewards. Uh, if they don't have those attitudes, they're going to be a scourge on the land, and they're going to do awful things. People do awful things in the name of the God of Israel, as it is, but the things that they do in the name of false gods uh,
well,
are
if we're going to
unspeakable.
draw lessons from your narrative today, it sounds like a couple of compelling examples. We do best when we take care of our garden. We plant trees.
Absolutely, and it's an obligation.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the only planet we're going to have at least in the near term. I feel that Elon Musk is right. We are destined to be an interplanetary, even an interstellar species. Um, but in the meantime, we've got to take care of planet Earth and always take care of planet Earth and we're obligated to do that, and that's our obligation under God. Um, I think believing in it would help if we did have some knowledge and recognize that there is truth to these propositions that have made the Jews who they are, uh, that has made the earth what it is, dominated by um, elevated, I should say, by Torah or biblical thought, um, that we've been energized and empowered by, these teachings of the Hebrew Revolution. But I think getting back to the God of Abraham and and following the God of mercy and kindness and intelligence and insight and care for the land is uh, the what we're going to need. I mean, of course, people will have their own ideas and they'll go their own ways. And the hallmark of the Hebrew Revolution is the intellectual freedom it gives for people to believe whatever the hell they want. But um, there should be some allegiance to the basic principles that, for instance, that this planet is all we've got, that God made man in his own image, and that the individual human being is holy and sacred, and that you can't use children as slaves, and that you shouldn't, just kill people if the population seems excessive. Um,
Well, if we
fair,
can,
fair dealing.
right. So we are people that works best if we deal compassionately with one another, take care of our legacy, whatever that may be. Elton John, that wonderful prophet, Sir Elton, cautioned us that if you go to Mars, check Rocket Man, it's cold as hell and you're going to miss your wife.
Yeah, yeah. We've got to focus on our planet. But when it comes to checking the legacy, I mean, I've got a neighbor, Bob. We call him Bob the Gypsy, or they're Rome. He and his family are Rome people, and Bob always says the old ways are the best ways, and and I know a lot. Bob has been my neighbor now for about 30 years, and they do they do all kinds of fraud with food stamps and all kinds of games and gaming the system. Um, and but Bob, the old ways are the best ways. His wife would tell people fortunes and try to winkle money out of them, and by giving them fortunes. The gypsies don't believe in fortune telling, but you know, but they do regard it as a valuable way of making a living. Um, so so it depends on which legacy you're going to protect. And some legacies really aren't worth a damn. I would say. Um, I the legacy. I keep coming back to the legacy of those cocoa farmers in Ivory Coast, enslaving enslaving children to make a few more bucks. Is That's their legacy.
So
You know.
if you go back to the Jewish duelist at Columbia, Franz Boas, the lessons that were passed down through three generations, and my chairman was part of the third generation at Stanford, the anthropology chairman. You change a culture as little as possible until you understand it thoroughly. And it's a mistake that we frequently make with our developmental funds or even with our militaristic endeavors. You know, I foresaw the Iraq debacle, and I remember friends were asking me about it, and I knew something of an Islamic culture, and I said, you know, our likelihood of being successful here is about the same as a police officer intervening in a domestic violence charge when both parties are equipped with AK 47s. You don't mess up. That's something you don't get involved with unless you understand it thoroughly.
We sure did mess up. There's a lot of hubris in all of this.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
well, we keep coming back to this idea that we today in America have repudiated our old ways, and we've thrown out. I think we both feel that there's an effort to throw out the baby along with the bathwater. Um, we've got a tremendous amount of good here in Western culture, and there's an effort to toss it out. I was just talking to somebody who was cursing Western culture as um, she's a that it's patriarchal and racist and and just basically altogether hopeless, and it's not, and it has the seeds of its renewal in it, um, so long as we adhere to it. I'm frightened by the lack of literacy of younger people. I was
Absolutely.
at a sale, and I picked up a copy of um, Orwell's first big selling book. He only had two, but Animal Farm. And Animal Farm was a very daring little book, a little fable that he wrote, and it seemed to threaten Stalin. I remember the publisher's wife was going to leave the publisher if he brought it out. It was still during the war because Stalin was doing a good job of killing the Nazis, and I'll leave you if you publish that. And go ahead. You know, he was quite a character. Um, but to us, to our generation of people, reading Animal Farm, it would be you just knock that off. And I was talking to this really nice, a young woman, covered with tats, and educated, and to her that would be like me reading or you reading War and Peace. You know, this little tiny book, it's a little more than a pamphlet. And she would, that would be a major endeavor for her to read that book.
So you didn't even try Voltaire's Candide then?
Which is all, yeah, another really simple thing. You can read it in a day, a couple days maybe, and but you wouldn't get her going on War and Peace. And our helper Eric, I wanted him to read 1984. Orwell's other really outstanding, best-selling book, and well. It's only been about 3 or 4 years that he's been plugging away at it. So one day maybe he keeps telling me he's going to finish it one day. He's a university graduate, but people, they don't read the way we did.
I will tell you,
they're losing a.
Orwell really hit upon a special phobia for me. When I was a kid, my task in the inner city of Motown, we were overrun with Norway rats. And
yeah.
And it was my task as a 4-year-old boy to take these grocery sacks of trash, and there was a bunker in the alley in which there were 2 aluminum trash cans, or maybe steel, and I'd lift up the top of the bunker, and these rats were scurrying around on all of this trash, and I'm supposed to throw the trash in, and I just couldn't stand it. And then later I'm reading 1984, and if you can recall, the protagonist, one of the tortures is the exposure to rats on his face in a cage.
And one thing he couldn't take, right?
Yeah, well, I couldn't. I read that one night. I didn't sleep at all the night after that.
Oh yeah, it was vivid torture.
Yeah. Well, I do recall in Animal Farm, I love the quote, which I think is very suitable for present times. All pigs are equal, but some pigs are more equal than others.
Right.
Loved it. Well, Michael, I think this really lays the stage for next time to talk about how we rebuild. And I will defer to you. And what does the Old Testament, the Torah, tell us about rebuilding? How does that inform where we're going to go next? I think there's still some wisdom there and relevance.
A lot, a tremendous amount. But I think leading people to better understand the God of Abraham, and realize that this isn't just some figment of God, but a very, not just a concept, but something that, ideas that deserve our careful examination, and instead of just dismissing the idea of it's just another figment, another idolatry, because it's not. It's different.
I'd like to begin next time. I've got another obligation, so we're going to have to end this wonderful dialogue today. But if we can go into what theoretical scientists, mathematicians, and others have said about the near certainty that there has been a creator responsible for all of this.
Okay. Got a big book all set, ready to go.
Ready to go? Yes. Okay. Again, Michael,
it's on the kitchen table.
Thank you so much
ready
for joining
me
today.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
All right, cousin.
Shalom.
Shalom. Be well.